This is KGW News at Sunrise.
Votes for President of the United States are as follows. Joseph R. Biden, Jr. of the state of Delaware has received 306 votes. Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida has received 232 votes.
After a tumultuous session lasting more than 13 hours and a deadly riot and attempted insurrection by Trump supporters leading to the evacuation of lawmakers at the U.S. Capitol, at 12:41 in the morning our time, Vice President Mike Pence finalizes the Electoral College votes for president and vice president.
So as Joe Biden and Kamala Harris now are certified to take office January 20th, the world is reacting to a day that many are calling a turning point in our country's history. As we come on the air here this morning, President Trump acknowledges the results and promises an orderly transition, but he still falsely claims that the vote was rigged.
Yeah, we didn't hear from the president on Twitter. That's because his account is locked after very controversial posts during the chaos that Twitter flagged as untrue. An overnight statement that he will make that orderly transition to Biden had to come from an official White House memo. And we were in Salem and Olympia yesterday as protesters also gathered at state capitals there and around the nation. The question everyone is asking, what comes next as we count down the days to inauguration?
We'll start by saying good morning on this Thursday. To say today will be busy would be an understatement, right, gang? We are watching developments right now. Congress has adjourned at this point, we can tell you that much, but we still expect a full day of news, including the shift in power in D.C. as the second Georgia Senate runoff race is called in favor of Democrat Jon Ossoff. Brenda, what do you say we jump right into some of this morning's other top headlines?
Absolutely. Breaking overnight, Congress has confirmed Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as the next president and vice president of the United States. Congress finished counting the Electoral College votes early this morning after hours of violence and unrest at the Capitol. President-elect Biden officially received 306 electoral votes. President Trump trailed with 232. Just minutes after the confirmation, President Trump acknowledged Biden's victory.
And he issued that statement through his deputy chief of staff, saying there will be an orderly transition of power on January 20th. But he continued falsely claiming the election was rigged. The president says he totally disagrees with the outcome of the election and goes on to say, quote, "I have always said we would continue our fight to ensure that only legal votes were counted. While this represents the end of the greatest first term in presidential history, it's only the beginning of our fight to make America great again," end quote. All this comes after a mob supporting the president stormed the Capitol yesterday, disrupting the electoral count. It started outside the building before rioters stormed security and got inside the Senate and House chambers, reaching the Senate floor. This morning, we have learned 4 people are dead. 1 woman was shot by U.S. Capitol Police. 3 others died from medical emergencies. At least 52 people have been arrested so far. Leaders are pointing the finger at the president, saying his repeated false statements of a rigged election incited this violence.
Well, we heard several Oregon lawmakers condemning the president yesterday and what they saw there in Washington, D.C. Kyle Aboshi has more this morning on their reaction.
Members of Oregon's congressional delegation are expressing their frustration after supporters of President Trump stormed the Capitol building. They're also describing the chaos of being rushed to safety.
It's a strange feeling to be locked in a room that is not really designed to be secure when there are angry people outside.
We spoke with Senator Jeff Merkley during a hastily arranged phone call. He and others evacuated to an undisclosed location. As the situation unfolded, Senator Ron Wyden tweeted out a message that he too was safe, along with Representatives Suzanne Bonamici, Kurt Schrader, and Peter DeFazio. Congressman Earl Blumenauer blamed the president in a tweet, saying, "The people storming the U.S. Capitol building right now are domestic terrorists, emboldened by Trump, and every Republican who has spread lies about the results of the presidential election. This has to stop." Newly sworn-in Congressman Cliff Bentz condemned the attack on the Capitol building. Bentz, a Republican from Eastern Oregon, has called for an investigation into the 2020 presidential election.
I think the answer here is we need to show people that they are being heard and that the issues that they care so much about are being debated and thoughtfully considered so that folks don't think they need to resort to this kind of thing.
Despite the frustration and fear, history was preserved. Senator Merkley shared a photo of the mahogany boxes holding Electoral College ballots that were rescued from the Senate floor. Kyle Aboshi, KGW News.
So after everything that happened yesterday, the fact is President Trump still has 2 weeks left in office. And now, Nina, a lot of people are asking what's going to happen in those final 2 weeks.
Yeah, some lawmakers are calling for another impeachment or invoking the 25th Amendment. Here's Jason Puckett with our verify of what's on the table.
Can the vice president invoke the 25th Amendment? According to a Congressional Research Service report, Section 4 of the 25th Amendment allows the vice president to, quote, assume the powers and duties of the office as acting president. Now, it only requires that the vice president have approval from the majority of the cabinet, but if the president challenges, then 2/3 of Congress would have to approve. So technically, yes, the vice president can invoke the 25th Amendment. But it's never happened in U.S. history, and that same Congressional Research Service report indicates that the amendment was, quote, not intended to facilitate the removal of an unpopular or failed president.
So as we've mentioned, President Trump's Twitter account is still locked this morning. The social site removed 3 tweets from his account for pushing conspiracy theories about the November election and the risk of violence. The page is supposed to be locked for 12 hours, but only if the president deleted those tweets. So we checked this morning. They're gone, replaced by a message saying they're unavailable because of violations. But we don't know if Twitter removed them or the president did. Twitter says any future violations will result in a permanent suspension of Trump's account. YouTube and Facebook also removed his videos.
Right now, we want to head down to Salem, where Trump supporters held a large and fiery protest yesterday. Elected state officials joined them, calling the presidential election rigged. Things turned chaotic, and there was one arrest. Our Bryant Clerkley is here now with a look at how the false claims of voter fraud have divided Salem. Bryant.
Good morning, Brenda. And it started as a legal gathering in support of the president, but got out of hand after protesters and counter-protesters clashed. And Sky 8 was overhead as an effigy of Governor Kate Brown was burned. It was a sizable crowd outside Oregon's Capitol, where even current elected officials called for possible violence. Video from the scene shows escalating violence with smoke bombs and punches being thrown between the protesters and counter-protesters who showed up as well. The main group, supporters of the president, who believe conspiracy theories about the election being stolen. And as we mentioned, there were speeches in support from current and former state lawmakers.
What we're being accused of today is the same thing that our forefathers were being accused of when they signed their names to the Declaration of Independence. They pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. What are we willing to do?
If you're the enemy of the people, I am your enemy. I can't do this for you. The strength is in you. I'm just a guy like you. I am just a guy like you, all right? Don't let any of these punks from that stone temple over there ever tell you they are better than any of you. Trust me, I work with these fools. None of them are half as good as any of you, and you need to bring the power to them.
We should note that for safety, the state capitol building was closed in anticipation of this protest. No one was inside except law enforcement. There was no comment from other leaders on the protest, but Oregon House Speaker Tina Kotek did release a statement about the chaos in Washington. She tweeted it was an attempted coup and a disgraceful, tragic day for our country and our democracy, and the decision to close the Capitol building was made in part because a few weeks ago an armed violent group smashed their way inside, and leaders are looking at protocol, safety protocol, after that event. Back to you guys.
All right, Bryant Clerkley live for us. Thank you. Meanwhile, up at the Washington State Capitol in Olympia, Trump supporters broke through the gate in front of the governor's mansion. Governor Jay Inslee was there as it happened, but security was able to get him to a safe location. About 50 people got onto the property, but no one got inside or caused any damage. So in contrast to much of what we saw, one group rallied for peace in Beaverton. They say they demonstrated to call for nonviolence in Washington, D.C. and beyond. Now, this vigil actually happens once a week, but this time they focused on the peaceful transfer of power.
What's needed for evil to succeed is for good people to do nothing. So we had to do something today to speak out and say we want peace, nonviolence, democracy. Trust our democracy.
Some members of the group told us they've been demonstrating since the beginning of the Iraq War.
In downtown Portland last night, police declared an unlawful assembly after people took the streets for what we were told was an anti-police protest. Police say the night started with people trying to break into the Multnomah County Courthouse. That group also smashed windows at a few stores nearby in Pioneer Place. That includes the Virginia Cafe, which is a restaurant that's been a part of the Portland business scene since 1914. That group also damaged a Starbucks and a bank. Police did manage to clear the streets last night by about 11:30.
This is KGW News at Sunrise.
We start the 6:30 half-hour Sunrise with these photos that show the chaos at the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. yesterday. Guns drawn in the House chamber. Senators and congressmen sheltering in place as a mob supporting President Trump storms the Capitol building. This morning, we're hearing reaction from Portlanders who were there, from the president's closest allies who are now breaking ranks, and from local lawmakers who condemned yesterday's attack. It was certainly a day that none of us will ever forget, but it's also not the first time that we've seen an attack at the Capitol. So we'll take a look into the history in just a few minutes.
But first, here's what we know right now. 4 people died in that riot. Capitol Police shot a Trump supporter inside the Capitol, a woman from San Diego. The others died during medical emergencies, but officials haven't added more specific details than that. 14 police officers were hurt and at least 52 people have been arrested so far. Police did find 2 pipe bombs, one each outside the Democratic and Republican National Committee headquarters. Congress reconvened around 5 o'clock our time last night and stayed until early morning to continue counting the electoral votes. 13 hours after they first gavelled in, and despite everything that happened, at 12:41 this morning our time, Vice President Mike Pence finalized the process. Congress confirming Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as the next president and vice president of the United States.
Overnight, President Trump also acknowledged their victory and said there will be an orderly transition of power. Tracy Potts is covering all of this live from just outside the Capitol today. Good morning, Tracy.
Hi, Brenda, Nina. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Outside the Capitol today, there is calm compared to what we saw, those unimaginable pictures here yesterday. Today, National Guard are still on patrol, watching the building after it was cleared early this morning and after lawmakers went back to work and, despite the disruption, got their work done.
Capitol Hill is quiet this morning after riots stopped the electoral vote count, sent lawmakers into hiding, and left 4 people dead, including this San Diego woman shot by police.
A woman died out there tonight, and you're making these objections.
The business of confirming Joe Biden as the next president continued all night.
The votes for President of the United States are as follows. Joseph R. Biden, Jr. of the state of Delaware has received 306 votes. Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida has received 232 votes.
With some Republicans now dropping their objections.
I cannot now in good conscience object to the certification.
All I can say is count me out. Enough is enough.
Brazen rioters smashing windows onto the Senate floor gave Democrats and Republicans a renewed resolve.
We will not be kept out of this chamber by thugs, mobs, or threats.
To those who strove to deter us from our responsibility, you have failed.
Some blaming President Trump's earlier comments at the Save America rally.
This is not dissent. It's disorder. It's chaos. It borders on sedition.
The president, stripped of his ability to tweet, called out Vice President Pence for not declaring him the winner.
What happened here today was an insurrection incited by the President of the United States.
The president eventually tweeted calling for calm, to no avail. Too little, too late, critics say, on a day when American democracy was tested and survived.
So now we watch for what the reaction is, including the president's. Of course, he can't tweet right now. His account has been blocked, but he did get a statement out through one of his advisors saying that even though he disagrees with the outcome, there will be an orderly transition on January 20th.
Well, Tracy, of course, there's now a lot of talk this morning about whether President Trump really incited that riot, how to deal with it. Was it a presidential abuse of power? What are you hearing there?
Right. So we're hearing officials, experts, lawmakers talk about whether he should be removed using the 25th Amendment. That would be up to the vice president and the cabinet, who would have to agree to that, and he could object to it. It would take 2/3 of Congress to override that. Congress, members of Congress talking about whether to impeach or censure the president because of the words that he said yesterday. Let's go march to the Capitol. A lot of people actually thought he was marching with them. He went back and watched it on TV at the White House. But those words immediately before this mob breached security at one of the most secure buildings in the world.
Yeah, just unbelievable to watch. Tracy Potts live for us in D.C. Thank you.
We're also hearing from some of our local leaders. Oregon Representative Earl Blumenauer says he supports a second impeachment. Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici, meanwhile, she had a shelter in place yesterday. She called it a sad and dangerous day for both our country and democracy. And she also posted this video.
It's time for him to resign or to be removed from office. This is completely unacceptable that he has encouraged these acts of violence and this terrible, awful, terrifying takeover of the Capitol here today.
Yep. Senator Jeff Merkley, meanwhile, posted this video of the damage that was left behind in his office. You see the door was kicked off its hinges, artwork ripped off the walls, a Trump flag was placed in the office, and a lit cigarette was left behind.
We got to hear from Oregonians who were right in the thick of the turmoil in Washington, D.C. Eric Post lives in Portland and was back east working on a documentary. When the crowd started moving toward Capitol Hill, he followed. Post says the people jumped a fence, just overwhelming police.
Cops were beating protesters. Protesters were beating cops. No different than Portland. The CS gas was deployed, pepper spray was deployed. I got shot with pepper balls. I mean, just everything was going on today. No different than in Portland, although it was just on a pretty intense scale.
In the meantime, 20-year-old Ish Espino from Salem was in that crowd as well. He says he believes the election was fraudulent and he was there to protest, but he says he did not take part in the violence.
I personally don't really condone it. I think it went a little too far, but people are fed up of all this.
Both men condemn what they saw, but they say there were peaceful demonstrators trying to stop the violent ones. President Trump supporters gathered at state capitol buildings across the country, including in Salem. Counter-protesters also showed up. Video shows the escalating violence with smoke bombs and the two groups throwing punches. At one point, police declared an unlawful assembly. One person was arrested for harassment and disorderly conduct.
Well, the scenes we saw at the U.S. Capitol, they are shocking, yes, but that building is actually not a stranger to violence. Let's connect the dots.
One of the most infamous incidents was in the contentious years leading up to the Civil War. Abolitionist Senator Charles Sumner gave a fiery speech attacking slavery. South Carolina Representative Preston Brooks didn't appreciate the speech and 2 days later lay in wait outside the Senate chamber. He beat Sumner with a cane so hard the cane broke. Sumner nearly died, but eventually recovered. Brooks resigned and returned to South Carolina. In 1954, 4 Puerto Rican nationalists opened fire inside the House of Representatives. 30 shots were fired. 5 House members were hit. One was seriously injured, but they all recovered. The Puerto Rican nationalists were all arrested and given long sentences. Years later, they were pardoned and returned to Puerto Rico. In 1998, an armed man charged past Capitol security and opened fire, killing 2 Capitol Hill police officers. It's not clear why the suspect, Russell Eugene Weston Jr., went on the attack, but he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and found incompetent to stand trial. He is still in a mental institution to this day, and that's connecting the dots.
Well, the breach of the U.S. Capitol, as you can imagine, is front page news this morning all around the world. Here are some of the reactions to the riots. The New York Times headline reads simply, "Trump incites mob." The Washington Post reads, "Trump mob storms Capitol." There it is. And the translation of this headline from Germany is, "Storm on the Capitol, 4 dead. Joe Biden's victory now official." In Nigeria, people are reading front pages filled with photos of the chaos. And in Britain, the front pages read, "Anarchy in the U.S. and democracy under siege." This was a scene, Brenda and Nina, that really started to unfold yesterday while we were all still here at KGW, still on our shifts. And as I went home, continued to watch at home, really to me, at some points when I was seeing the video, as crazy as it was, it appeared to me like this is not even our country. This is the type of coverage I would see from another country, not ours.
Yeah, I had to eventually just, lay down and close my eyes after a while because it was just getting to be too much. But I really thought the crux of it happened last night about 5 o'clock when, all the House members came back on the floor and Mitt Romney honestly said the best way we can show respect for the voters who are upset is by telling them the truth about the election. And he got applause from the floor after that.
I have to say, as I was watching coverage, I heard some of the best speeches on unity I have heard in I can't even remember how long. I couldn't tell at times whether they were Republicans or Democrats. But my thought was, where have you been? Because they only told the truth when they were on the run and had to evacuate down to bunkers in the Capitol building. When we're silent, there are major consequences, and that was my takeaway from yesterday.